will be very briefly. Yes, sir, if I could, and I will be very brief. You've introduced the four of us, and we will do our best to try to put in perspective our thoughts about the FAA's performance on 9/11. As you said, on September 11, I was the acting deputy administrator of the FAA. I was on duty that day in my office and was obviously very much involved on that day. Let me make just a couple of remarks, if I could, kind of tailored to this morning's discussion. Before September 11, 2001, the FAA and the FBI were the key federal agencies in the management of historical hijackings in the United States. Procedures, protocols, and communication links were in place to manage a more traditional hijacking type of scenario. Roles and responsibilities were pretty much defined by law and by memorandums of agreement between the FAA, the FBI, and the Department of Defense. At that time, FAA's primary communication channel with the military was through the National Military Command Center, and we've heard that discussion this morning, and I think that's been validated that that is and was, at that time, our primary communication point. And National Military Command Center, in a hijack scenario, had the responsibility to coordinate DoD's response to requests from the FAA or the FBI. The FAA at that time did not have direct, dedicated communication links with NORAD. The NMCC was the coordination authority between the FAA and DoD organizations. And I think it's important in the discussions about what information FAA passed to NORAD that it's important to understand that the NMCC was the primary communication point in the military with the FAA in terms of the hijack net in the FAA headquarters. On the morning of 9/11, it became clear that the historical procedures, the protocols, and the communication links were not adequate. The FAA and other agencies were reacting to a scenario that had not been practiced or modeled. Decision makers, including myself, were reacting quickly and, in my opinion, professionally, but in an untested environment. I think the staff's description of improvisation is accurate, and I absolutely take no exception to that. We were, in my view, in a reaction mode in an environment in which we had not been in before. Throughout the morning, our FAA focus, in my belief, was on our primary air traffic mission, which was a safe operation of air traffic, which was a safe operation of the air traffic control system. FAA facilities in New York, Boston, and the Air Traffic Control System Command Center stopped all arrivals and departures in certain regions and at various airports. At 9:45 a.m., when the order was given to land all aircraft immediately at the closest airport, over 4,500 aircraft were in the system. Our focus at that time was to safely land those hundreds of thousands of passengers. By 12:16, for the first time in the history of the FAA, our U.S. airspace was empty of all aircraft, except for military and essential emergency flights. Over 4,500 aircraft and hundreds of thousands of passengers were safely landed under unique and highly stressful conditions. Roughly one flight every 2 seconds under those stressful conditions landed throughout the country. FAA controllers, supervisors, pilots, flight crews, dispatchers, and the automation equipment they used all performed flawlessly. And when we knew in the FAA headquarters that all the flights were safely on the ground, our attention then turned later that early afternoon to the process of reopening the airspace at some future time. There were enormous decisions and processes that we need to go through to make sure the aircraft were safe, that the airports were safe. The airports had to recertify their security status. And of course, the airlines had enormous logistical challenges to get back into a scheduled operation. In terms of lessons learned, the most significant improvement, in my opinion, made after September 11 were establishing direct communication links between FAA facilities and NORAD, direct dedicated communication links, and establishing a 24-hour continuous communication link between the FAA, DOT, and other federal agencies, and you've heard that referenced to earlier this morning. In my written statement, I listed numerous other improvements made by the FAA and the Department of Transportation subsequent to September 11. I won't go through all those now in the interest of time. I do want to, as a follow-up to, I guess, the first question that was asked by Commissioner Lehman, one thought that I believe the Commission really ought to think about in terms of recommendations for the future As I said at the very beginning, since 9/11, the procedures and the protocol and the communication and the training awareness have changed since 9/11. I think the extensive steps that have been taken by the FAA to better integrate the domestic air traffic control system with the air defense system of the United States will ensure a quicker, more reliable response capability. But I'm not as certain that the decision-making procedures are well established between the FAA, the DoD, the FBI, and now the new player in the game, the Transportation Security Administration. And let me just, if I could very briefly just explain that concern, which frankly I hope is not real, but I must tell you I think it is something that you should focus on. Prior to 9/11, the procedures for managing a traditional hijacked aircraft, as I said, were in place and pretty well tested. The FAA and the FBI were the primary agencies, but in today's world, those procedures have obviously changed. When TSA was created, it took over decision authority that was previously the responsibility of the FAA administrator. DoD clearly has a more dominant role in today's world, and the FAA Air Traffic Organization has much more responsibility. And I would suggest that your commission strongly look at the suggestion to encourage those agencies to test the procedures, to make sure that the protocols and the agreements are consistent with existing law, so that should, God forbid, we have another incident, there's absolutely no hesitation in terms of who is in charge, because the world is different today than it was on September 11. Thank you very much, and we will do our best to answer your questions.